This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. This podcast is provided with the understanding that it does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. If you're looking for help, seek out a qualified medical services provider or other healthcare professional. Welcome to the Live Your Yoga podcast, a podcast dedicated to discovering and sharing all the ways in which yoga can be lived off the mat. Real stories by real people, just like you.
Welcome to the Live Your Yoga podcast, where we explore the profound ways in which yoga intersects with every aspect of our lives. In today's episode, co-hosted by myself and Salla, we are joined by Christine King, prenatal yoga teacher and mother to her beautiful 2-year-old little girl, Isla. Christine lives in Port Coquitlam, Canada, and balances her time as a mama, wife, yoga teacher, working full-time, and still striving to find moments to prioritize her own health and wellness. I'm sure many listeners can relate to this. For this episode, we will be diving into the world of teaching prenatal yoga, how Christine's own experiences and learnings as a mama have enhanced her teaching to expectant mothers, and why Christine is so passionate about sharing the benefits of this practice with others. So welcome to the podcast, Christine.
Thank you for having me. So excited to be here.
We're so grateful that you've taken the time to be with us. And hi to Salla.
Hi. And for everybody listening, Christine and I have just had our first introduction to each other. So unlike Joanna, I'm going to be absorbing all of your insight and experience for the first time. So I'm so excited to get going.
Yay. Yeah, I didn't mention it already, but me and Christine are good friends and we teach together at a local studio called Sadhana Yoga and Sound in Port Coquitlam. And we have taught alongside each other for about 8 years now.
Yeah.
We've co-hosted a retreat together on Bowen Island, and we just share very similar morals and kind of a very similar approach to teaching, I think, which has kept us as great kind of teammates and helped us to evolve a really beautiful friendship. So I just thought it would be great to have Christine on board on the podcast because she comes from a really passionate place of teaching prenatal yoga, which is something we haven't really talked about that much on the podcast, I don't think, and is an area of yoga that I haven't delved into myself as a teacher. I'm not sure, Salla, whether you have done any prenatal training at this point.
No, not officially. But I've dipped my toes into bits. But I'm so excited to hear about how this benefits the community because mothers are essential to how our world goes. And so I'm so excited.
Yay!
Well,
I know
so excited to be here and share.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really important episode. So perhaps you could just start by sharing a little with our listeners, Christine, about your yoga teaching, your yoga teacher training background. So where you did your training, what trainings you've done, and perhaps what being a yoga teacher currently looks like for you.
Yeah, of course. So my journey started in 2017. I was actually living in London at the time. Another thing Joanna and I connect with is our UK kind of connection. And I lived there for 5 years. I took my yoga teacher training while I was working full time. It was a Ashtanga, Vinyasa, and Rocket training, which, if you know who I am now, makes absolutely no sense. But it was such a life-changing experience. And even though it's not like what I teach now or who I am now at all, it was still such an important part of course, my journey in just starting to teach. And also, just with the learnings of yoga, the limbs, the the whole kind of philosophy behind it, it was kind of all new to me. So it was such an eye-opening experience that I just really connected with. So that's where I got started, 2017. And yeah, I've taken many trainings. I am in the midst of getting like my 300 hours to make the 500. I'm getting very, very close. I'm not quite there yet, but I've done 100 hours anatomy training. I've done 85 hours prenatal, 20 hours postnatal. I've done Ayurveda in pregnancy. I've done trauma informed. So I've done quite a few, extra trainings since that point. And yeah, so that's kind of where I am at with training. I currently teach at 2 different studios locally to me. As Joe mentioned, I teach at Sadhana and Poco, and I teach up in Coquitlam as well at Jai Yoga Studio. I was teaching 5 classes, but I am now teaching 3 very recently. I have just had to back off slightly because it was starting to just become a little bit too much for me. So yes, so I teach 2 at Sadhana and now 1 at Jai a week. So that's what I'm doing currently.
And before we go on to our next question, are they a mix of everything you've trained in, the classes you're teaching?
No. So when I started teaching, so I started teaching in London, but I very quickly, so in 2018, moved back to Canada, which I was born and raised in Port Coquitlam. We moved back. My mom got sick. So my husband and I, we came here. This is where I met Joe at the very first studio I started teaching at in Coquitlam. And when I taught there at the studio that Joe and I met at, there was many different classes. I started teaching flow, power, vinyasa, everything that I'd been trained in or what I felt comfortable teaching. But the studio owner, she was very, I don't know what the word is, flexible, relaxed. She was just like, I need like a yin class covered. Do you want to take it? And I was like, I'm not too sure if I can teach that. So I was like, I don't know. I'm not trained in that. Can I teach that? Anyways, I ended up subbing like all kinds of classes, many classes that I didn't necessarily feel comfortable teaching, but I was like, I'm a new teacher. I've just got to get out there. I've got to meet the people. I've got to do the things. And I almost immediately like fell in love with the practice of yin, of slower practices. So nothing like what I had been trained in Ashtanga Vinyasa and Rocket. Like I said, I don't think I really knew what I was getting myself into. But yes, I mainly teach more relaxing style classes now, slow flows, yin, and yeah, as mentioned, prenatal as well, which again is like a slow flow type. That's where I'm at now. Yes,
Can I
Joe?
just add to that? Yeah, no, I think that's such a valuable point you've just made, because we have a lot of listeners who are in their teacher training right now. And you bring up such a good point that when you go out into the world of teaching, you perhaps visualize that you're going to be a certain type of teacher, you're going to be teaching a certain style of practice. But the reality, once you get into the arena, can be very different. And so I think that's a really good point to make, that like you might love practicing power and vinyasa practices. You might love being in a hot studio as a student. But when you step into the seat of the teacher, you could have a very different experience of those classes. And like Christine said, she's along her path found that she's definitely more of a slower, mellow teacher and leans more towards the yin style practices. So I think it's just a good thing to highlight and remind the students of that. You're going to find out who you are as a teacher once you get into teaching. It might not happen in your teacher training. It might be something that comes a bit later, and you do have to throw yourself into a lot of different experiences
Absolutely.
to figure it out. And some of those feel scary and uncomfortable, but that's part of the ugly kind of growing process of figuring out who you are and what you want to offer and what you connect to. So thank you for saying that.
100%. I mean, and you and I, Jo, we've talked so much over the years about like how we feel as teachers and what we teach and like how we connect to what we teach. And I think, you know, a lot of conversations we had were about like, you know, being authentic and how we sometimes struggled with what we were teaching and if we felt really connected to the practice or the, you know, the style of class. And I think over the years, you know, you really have to teach as much as you possibly can and really have those really hard conversations with yourself, with your community, with your friends, your fellow teachers, because, you know, it's such a, like when I think about this kind of like winding road of how I got to where I am now, like I've made so many bad decisions, but I mean, it's the same with life, right? Like you kind of have to make those decisions to, you know, the hard choices to figure out what is right for you. Because like I said, if I hadn't said yes to covering these classes, even though I wasn't qualified to teach them and I didn't feel comfortable teaching them, like especially going from teaching Ashtanga to then having to be in a pose for 3 minutes or something. I just was like, looking at my watch or whatever, being like, oh my gosh, this is so weird. I'm just like sitting there like, and now, oh my gosh, it's just like glorious. I just like sit there and I breathe and I like say nice things and I'm very comfortable with the time and the quiet. But it takes so much time. It takes so much practice too, right? Like it's not just about like them and their practice. We're practicing teaching. We're practicing, you know, being present with the class. We're practicing our timings and our language, like, you know, my language and how I use it and the way I use it now is so different. I'm very like particular about the words I use, when I say them, how I say them. I don't want to trigger people. I don't want to say something that's going to make somebody feel uncomfortable, because there are words that, you know, some people don't resonate with, body parts people don't connect to. Like there's so many things. And I think we just have to be really mindful of that, you know, and you can't just go into something thinking that you're going to be really good at it right away. It's like going to different classes, seeing different teachers, having these conversations with your fellow yoga teachers. How do you say this? What do you say here? And really finding something that connects with you and your audience, your students, your community, right?
So, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And do you know, I love that you went into being specific and particular and having a mindful approach with the words you're using, because in prenatal yoga, building that connection between mum and baby, and also being allowing mums to have that silence where they might not have that in their day-to-day life. I just see your link between yin and prenatal, and they hold such a similar space, even though the stretching qualities are different. There is something there I see. So thanks for sharing that. My
That's
next
a nice
question
note, Salla,
is
actually. I never thought about that. The link there. Thanks for mentioning. I never even considered that, but you're right. Now that you mention it, it's funny. Sorry, carry on.
Oh, it's interesting you see it too. Yeah. So we'll ask this as a prenatal yoga teacher and of course a mother. I'm going to ask about how your personal experience has shaped your approach to teaching yoga, especially to expectant mothers.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And when I was reading the questions earlier, this is one that I was thinking a lot about, because when I think about kind of where my journey began with prenatal yoga, because of course that wasn't how it started. How it started, of course, was just teaching and just getting as much experience as possible. In 2020, so obviously my husband and I, we were having conversations about potentially starting a family. I started to think a lot about, what that would look like, getting pregnant, teaching yoga, practicing yoga. And I just very honestly, very frankly, I just had no idea. It was kind of like almost embarrassing because I started to think about, maybe in the past, pregnant people that might have tried to come to my classes. And I wasn't able to support them. And I do really feel like as yoga teachers, the goal is to make everybody feel comfortable in your class. And also, of course, there are prenatal classes, pregnant people do, of course, have to make their own kind of decisions on their body and what they do with it. But also, it's our responsibility to make people all feel safe and comfortable when they come into our classes. So that was kind of how it all began. Yes, my husband and I were actively trying. I actually ended up having a miscarriage, which is obviously at that moment in time when I was kind of considering all of these things, it was just kind of mind blowing to me that, this major thing, super common, 1 in 3 women will have a miscarriage. And there was so many things that I was just like, I just don't know enough. I don't know enough about being pregnant. I don't know enough about giving birth, about miscarriages, about my pregnant body, and potentially even teaching a yoga class in a pregnant body. And I was just like, this feels crazy. This feels crazy that I just don't know any of this. And obviously, as Joe knows, my mom had passed a couple of years before. So I didn't have somebody that I could just talk to about what it all meant and how all of this was going to happen. So I just felt so misinformed. And I ended up deciding to take the prenatal training. It ended up happening in 2020. Was it the summer of 2020 I took it? Yeah. So it was the summer of 2020. It was a couple of months course. It was just a few hours in the day. And it was kind of part of my healing, my coping through obviously that whole time, which was quite difficult. It was COVID. I was doing it all from home. So that was great. I was able to really dive in. And that's really kind of where all of it began. I mean, I ended up getting pregnant again and obviously having my daughter. In early 2021, I became pregnant. So again, it all kind of came at a time when it was just so necessary for me to heal, to grow, to kind of feel like I could move forward. And just, there was people coming to my classes and I just didn't feel prepared to teach them. I just didn't feel prepared to teach a pregnant person. I would just be like, don't lie on your front side, carry on. It was, yeah. So that's where it became really important to me. Not only for myself, but then realizing how many people I wasn't including in my classes because I just couldn't fully support them is kind of where that all kind of started. I think that was the question. I hope that wasn't too much.
No, you answered that in such honesty.
Yeah.
So thank you. Yeah.
It's important to talk about these things. I think I've said this to Joe, and I actually had a really good conversation with Joanna's mother about this. And it's things that so many people deal with, but it's just not talked about. And I just feel like to make it okay, to make it, not necessarily, but to help heal and stuff. We need to have these conversations. It needs to be not okay for it to happen. You know what I mean? It's not great. We all have bad things happen, but when bad things happen, we normally talk about it. But I feel like with women and miscarriages and things like that, we keep everything so close to our chest. but it's not going to help us heal. It's not going to help other people. It's not going to do any good, really. So I really, really believe in having these conversations. So that's where I feel.
I mean, your passion just like radiates from you, and like clearly that's now as you go about not just teaching like specifically prenatal classes, but in your regular classes, like you said, you're now so much more well informed. You have your own experience to go off and use that to help you with your teaching, and obviously that like grows your community and strengthens you as a teacher, which is just, part of that, like the sticky mud that we find ourselves in. And we grow from these, like, awful experiences, traumatic experiences, the uncomfortable. And, out of that comes this whole new version of yourself as a person and as a teacher. So 100%. It's beautiful that now that you can utilize that as you go about your teaching journey, but also you're more experienced in your own body now. When you speak to other females about their experiences, and totally. I'm sure it allows you to feel more connected to other women when you have those conversations. So there is beauty that comes with these awful moments, right? That with we go
everything
through.
In life, though, really, if you think about it, I mean, there's no hard thing that we go through. It doesn't. We always come out of it with more. As awful as certain things are, maybe we learn something more about ourselves. Maybe we learn how to deal with something. Like you don't come out of bad experiences with nothing. Right. Like we will always come out of it with something. And I do think it's how you look at it too. Like, mindset is such a huge role in how we live our lives. And if we can nobody gets out of life unscathed. I really that's one of my favorite things. There's not a soul that will get out of this life unscathed. So how can we get through it? How can we, better ourselves through these experiences? And like you said, I think connection is such an important role in that. Connection with ourselves, with others, because everybody's going through something. Everyone. Every single person on this planet is going through something. There's no way you could not be. It's just the way of the world. And I just think that if you can find some common ground, even if your experiences are different, it doesn't matter. How can we get through these hard moments together? It just, like you said, you find that kind of special way to move through and grow. And the mindset is just important with that, because you could very easily go the other way, right? But, you can get something out of everything.
Right.
You can, if you choose to.
I think that's our practice, right? We're all coming from a yoga perspective, and we understand that we have to take care of our mind, and we understand that there are patterns to the mind that we can either choose to follow, or we can reprogram if we want to. But yeah, like you said, not everybody has that same perspective or outlook. So again, we're very blessed that we found this path. I was wondering if you could perhaps talk a little more about the unique, you've mentioned it a little bit, we've touched on it slightly, but just the unique physical and emotional challenges or aspects, maybe not all challenges, aspects that come with a pregnant body, and how does prenatal yoga help, expectant mothers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when we think about pregnancy, I think that the immediate word that kind of comes to mind is change. And I think that when you're so used to, I guess, who you are. So as women, yes, we have monthly changes, we have cycles, But for the most part, you've had however many years to kind of get to know your body, kind of know what's going on, you know when it's going to happen. You kind of like you get quite used to your rhythms, what you like to eat, what you do with your body. And I think in pregnancy, it's just everything goes out the window. Everything you're used to, every way that your body moves, does things. It's such a challenging time because, like I said, you've had so many years to get used to how you are. And then all of a sudden, it's all different. It's like you're getting to know a totally different body, a totally different mindset. You're just having to almost start from scratch. And there's symptoms. And especially, as I mentioned before, if you're, as I was, like so unprepared for these changes, like there's so many different symptoms you could have, like far too many, like way, way, way too many. And you might not have them all and you might feel great. And to those of you, like, good. I'm so happy for you. But for most people, like it's very uncomfortable. There's a lot of things you're uncertain about. There's a lot of trying to Google to figure out if that's like a normal symptom, a not normal symptom. Like, what is this? Like, I've never even, you're like, I have never even liked that food before in my life, or that smell is weird, or, it's just so much change. So I think the beauty of prenatal yoga is you're in a room with other people all going through this exact same confusing, crazy transition. It's a transition becoming pregnant. It could be a transition from, just being a woman or, a person to a mother, or it could be already a mother to having another. But regardless, you're in a transition period of your life is one thing. You're going to transition for 9 months and then your life is another thing, right? It's not, there's no getting out of it without a complete overhaul of your life. So I think that there's so much, that you can get out of just being in a room full of people, women that are experiencing the exact same thing or similar to you. And I think part of it is pregnancy and postpartum can be lonely. Especially if you don't have friends that are experiencing the same thing, or friends that maybe they haven't, experienced having children. It's not an easy thing to relate to. Even like my husband, as much as he is the loveliest person and tries his best, he will still like never really truly understand what is going on. Like, not that I will either, but I still have to experience it, right? So I think there is beauty in that, in coming together in any way. Yoga, amazing, even better. You're connecting to your body, your breath, which is constantly changing. So being able to just be present with yourself for an hour when usually everything else is utter chaos. That's such an important and powerful thing to do for yourself when everything is so out of your control.
The word powerful there, as in taking back some time, taking back a bit of control in the transition. Beautifully put. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Let's see if this next question. So I have a challenge for you, because when we start talking about those we love, especially like your daughter, this next question is about how your daughter's inspired you. Mm-hmm. If you could think of like 3 ways that your daughter has inspired you in your teaching, and especially lessons that you've then been able to apply to your teaching, can you give us 3 ways that your beautiful daughter has given you that insight?
Yeah, sure. I was thinking about, the lessons that my daughter teaches. I talk to Jo about this a lot. The lessons that she teaches me on a daily basis. It's pretty insane. Like, it's crazy. I think like the main one, I might be able to come up with two more, but the like big one for me, the like number one above everything is presence. I think when you, I don't know how to word this right. Before having a kid, before having my daughter, I feel like presence was something that I could try and like get back sometimes. Like, it wasn't something that I had to work really hard towards. I could kind of just be like, oh, okay, Christine, get present. You've got this. Take a few breaths. It's fine. With her, with my daughter, like, being present is something that you have to really so actively work towards 100% of the time. Kids require all of your attention, and they need all of your attention. And so presence is like, it's such a key takeaway from having kids. It's such an important thing for your relationship with your kid. I just think when I'm not present with her, it's so apparent. She's bored. She's trying to get your attention. She's like, what's more important than me? And nothing's more important than her, but we all have lives. We all live these crazy, busy, insane lives that it can be so difficult sometimes to just stop what you're doing. It's not that important. She needs your attention. So I would say presence is like absolutely 100% the most important thing that she's teaching me every minute of every day. And I think that that's translated into my teaching in a huge way. I feel like when I'm teaching, because I'm spending time away from her, I need to really make it count. Does that make sense? Like, before I would teach, I love to teach. I've always loved teaching. But now I'm taking an hour and a half out of my time with her to be somewhere else. That has to be important. That has to be worth it. So I'm therefore more present in my teachings every time I leave the house and have to say goodbye to her. It has to be for a reason. It has to be important. It has to mean something to the people there. I have to give them something, presence, connection. It has to be worth it. So I'm going to keep it at one. I'm going to keep it to that.
I mean, that answer was absolutely awe-inspiring in so many ways. So yeah, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so how do you find balance as a mama, a yoga teacher, and working full-time? Because Christine has a full-time job, like 40 hours a week. So the first part of this question is, how do you find balance? And I mean, maybe there's not an answer to that.
I know. I laughed when I read this question. I was like, oh my gosh, balance. What is that?
Yeah. I mean, what is balance? That's true. But how are you kind of navigating that is maybe a better way to answer it. And the second part to this question is, what does self-care look like for you at the moment?
Yeah, I was thinking about this one, and it's such a difficult thing. I think that this question was the hardest one for me because I don't know. It's not something I've figured out. I don't think I have balance. I don't think I take enough time for myself. I don't think that. I feel like there's so much sacrifice that you have to make as a parent. And that's okay, because that's something I really wanted. This is a choice that I made, not that it's not hard. Of course it is, but balance and parenting, I think, routines are super helpful. When there's something out of your control, like your child is sick, It's awful. Everything goes out the window. It's like the worst thing that's ever happened, but you just got to get through it. But routines, generally speaking, help a lot just with finding that balance. I think I go up into my room and shut the door, usually about 8:30 at night, 9 o'clock at night, because I'm a person that needs a lot of quiet, a lot of alone time, generally speaking. And I don't get that. Not at all. And I mean, Joanna knows my husband. He is possibly the chattiest, like needs noise and music and like literally all the time. And I am not that kind of person. I need like quiet silence. Don't talk to me. I don't want music. I don't want a podcast. I don't want noise. I just need like just complete quiet for like 30 minutes. So I lock myself in my room. He stays down, plays his video games, watches his shows, does whatever he needs. And I go up and I quietly brush my teeth and wash my face. Maybe occasionally I do a face mask, but like it's honestly, it's not very much. I don't have family. We don't have a lot of like people to look after my daughter. So, every now and then we take a date night, but that's once every maybe like 3 months possibly. So it's, it's hard. It's hard. I think that we can't sugarcoat parenting. It's really, really hard. And I always like to say to Joe that like, it's the best and the worst and everything in between. It's like literally the happiest you've ever been and probably the saddest you have ever been too. It's like everything. So, it's not for the faint of heart. You can't go into parenting blind. It's literally everything in the most extreme sense of the word, So yes, right. Don't have balance, very little self-care, but we're here, we're doing it, I teach yoga and I love that. So that's part of it too. Like that's part of what I do to take myself out of the situation. It's still like work in a sense, but it's what we're very passionate about doing it. So it doesn't feel like work in the same way.
Yeah, it's filling up your cup, even though your output is so much. You're still gaining lots from the experience too.
Totally.
And honestly, like I feel like you're doing yourself a disservice because I know you and I know that you do find ways to implement self-care and you find creative ways to offer yourself wellness. You know that nature is a healer. Moving your body is a healer.
I spend a lot of time outside. Yeah.
That nutrition is super valuable and important to you, and you really prioritize that. And I see you doing these things that maybe you don't always realize are helping you, but you innately know that they are, and you just do them automatically. So I think just those reminders that you are like, when you can, you're nourishing your body, you're moving your body, you're being outside, you're also inviting your daughter to be part of those experiences with you. So she's seeing an example.
Totally.
Of what
I guess I don't think about that, but it's the lifestyle that Ryan and I live though, isn't it? It's, I guess you really have to think about the lifestyle that you want to live, and as hard as it is, try and fit, those important things or the things that you value, and invite your kids, your child into that. So, we do spend a lot of time in nature, lots of walks, we do try and eat healthy. You're right. But that was things I was doing before. So I guess it's hard to think that but yes, of course, that's how we keep balance. We try and keep the same rhythms, even though things are completely different, but they're also the same. We still try and keep the things that are important to us. We still keep them high on our priority list in the week. Ryan has to be outside a lot. We go outside a lot. And Isla loves it. It's like a win-win for all of us. But nature is underrated for sure. Because it changes everything, all of our moods completely change when we go outside. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? And I feel like everything you've just shared there is so real, and everyone has a different experience, but it's been absolutely fascinating listening to yours. So thank you for sharing that. And we touched upon how specifically teaching prenatal yoga can foster a sense of community and support expectant mothers. But I'd love to know if you have any firsthand experiences of like seeing this, or where you can, where it's okay to share, if any students have fed back to you where you've had that moment of, oh my gosh, wow, this really is doing all of what I wanted it to do. And what earlier you shared in the podcast, what you needed yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like actually kind of a good example of this. It wasn't anything anybody said particularly to me, or anything that kind of like might outrightly seem like prenatal yoga or the classes that I was teaching was a benefit. But at Sadhana, where Joe and I teach, I was teaching a prenatal yoga class, a weekly one there. And there was about 5 or 6 people that would come each week. And it ran for a few months. And it was the same kind of people, right? Like it's the same people every time. They start to get to know each other. And nobody, like, of course, people said that they really felt like they loved the class. They needed the movement. They needed the break, the space, all of these things, 100%. But for me, the nicest thing, the almost like biggest compliment without any words, is that not only postpartum they all still come to my classes, which is so sweet and lovely, but they hang out with each other. They go on dates. They go and have little mom coffees. They talk to each other about daycare. That's the connection. That's what the whole point of that for me is. Like I said, it can be a lonely place being pregnant, especially postpartum. Postpartum can be so lonely. You are up at all times. Your partner might be sleeping. You have nobody to talk to. You're just sleepless with a child trying to figure things out, and having like that one other person, or, even 2 that you can message in the night and they're up to, is just, it makes all the difference in the world. It's so important. That connection, that's the biggest compliment to me, was that they were happy to still connect after the fact. After the classes ended, they're still hanging out and they still chat in the room and everything. And I think that's the most important thing.
Love that. I feel like that kind of leans into the next question too, but maybe you have something extra to add to this. Kind of talking about the way you're empowering these expectant mothers and helping them to trust their bodies and embrace this transformation that they're going through. Is there anything else you'd like add to that? Is there any like intention that you have as the teacher going into these classes specifically for prenatal students, where you're like, if they just go away with this one thing, I'll feel like my job is done as a teacher?
Totally. I think for me, like when I did my prenatal, like when I taught my prenatal teacher training, 2 of them had kids, but one of them didn't. And it was super interesting, teaching the idea of prenatal yoga to somebody that hadn't had that experience. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's an amazing thing. Like, absolutely do it, regardless if you're going to have a kid or not. It's just super interesting. It's great to know about the female body. And as we were saying before, to just feel like you can welcome a pregnant person in your class. But she kept asking, so she taught a lot of Ashtanga Vinyasa classes, lots of power, lots of flow. And she kept kind of asking about, how she could basically like incorporate her style of teaching into like a pregnant body or a pregnant prenatal class. And what I kept coming back to as like, your intention is to let these people connect to their breath and their body, literally just for an hour, not necessarily think about their sore feet, their, maybe gestational diabetes, which I had. Maybe they're dealing with other complications, difficulties. Maybe they're feeling nauseous. They have heartburn. Maybe they're exhausted. They've already got a kid. They've got another one on the way. Like, I was trying to explain to her that it is hard to imagine, but you could be having all of those symptoms. You could be literally dealing with your work, a kid, already having 50 symptoms, and all you want to do is just take that 1 hour for yourself. Even if you were to just lie there for the 1 hour, connect to your breath and your body, like that is the intention. That is the goal. It's to, regardless if they move or not, an asana practice is great. It will alleviate some lower back problems, maybe, some sciatic pain. There are a lot of physical discomforts potentially for some people with pregnancy, but a lot of times it's in our minds, it's mental, like I said, the change, all the different things we're thinking about. How are we going to afford a second kid or a first kid? How are we going to live with a child? Daycare is impossible to get to. There's so many things going on in your head. It's not just about you anymore. And I just feel like a prenatal yoga class, or, just even a pregnant body in a yoga class, if they are just able to take some time to just not think about those zillions of things that they're constantly thinking about, even if it's for 5 minutes of the 60, then you've won, right? You've given them something that they probably needed. So I think that is the intention. The goal is just to let somebody have a bit of a break from all of this pressure that you put on yourself, and to stop thinking about all of the zillion things going on and changes that you're about to experience, because it's a lot. It's a lot. And it's all out of your control. So it's the practice of letting go, of surrendering. And I think that's another big intention for a prenatal class, is surrender or letting go, because it's so hard, but it's so important, so important.
Wow. Thank you so much. You have gifted the listeners like advice, perspective, insight, so many amazing things. If anyone is interested in, like training in prenatal, or just dipping their toes in, or just wanting to listen to this, it's been amazing. So the next question that I was about to ask, I feel you've already covered it. It was just stunning. So instead, what I'm going to ask is something that, and probably you will relate to this, and so does everybody in life at some point along their journey. But specifically, if we're looking at expectant mothers, this idea of how to trust in their bodies when everything is in such transition, as you've said, and things might feel out of control, surprise symptoms. How do you use prenatal yoga to facilitate more trust?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. I feel like trust isn't a given. It's definitely something that is a practice. But I think the key with trusting your body, especially in pregnancy and, when there is so much going on, is trying to stay present. So again, it's the same thing. If you're able to just take a few moments out of each day to slow down, to stop, to take a moment of stillness, to, draw your hands to baby, just start to connect. Because I think the other thing is that it can be very difficult to come to terms with the fact that the body changes and the baby, it can be hard to connect those two. Sometimes we just think, oh, this is happening in my body, the uncomfortable feelings, the symptoms. But if we start to think like, there's a reason for this, there's a human there, there's like, how incredible, how amazing is our bodies being capable of creating life. It's the most incredible, most amazing thing. Like, there's no other explanation for that. It's a miracle. It's incredible. Like, how can we do it? How can we still like move on? How do we then raise children after we give birth? Like, I think if we put it in perspective of what our bodies are doing, so, it's not for nothing. That's the other thing. And then, that's a big practice when we talk about prenatal yoga and preparing for birth. A lot of people get very concerned about the pain component of it, right? Of course, absolutely. But the big thing that I like to say is there is pain, but it's not suffering. Suffering is when it's almost like needless, right? Like, the pain is there. It won't go away. There's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you get out of it. It's just you're suffering. But, you're getting this incredible little being out of it. There's purpose to it. And there's meaning behind it. And there's so much love involved that I just think, we really have to put it in perspective. You can't just say that, okay, you trust your body. It's really about perspective. Again, what are you getting out of this? Why are you feeling these things? Well, there's a child at the end of this, and they will be everything. They will be like an extension of you. And it's the most amazing thing, that could possibly ever happen. So that's kind of, it might be, it's very deep, but it's the truth. It's the truth, really. And any mother or anybody that has had a child will understand those words, because again, there's no suffering in it. It's just, you just have to get through it. You just have to be present. You just have to realize the intention behind all of this, right? So that's my suggestion. That's my thoughts on that.
That was a great question, Salla.
It was good.
Trust in this body that it can do what it needs to do. Mm-hmm. Trust in this body that it's going to grow this baby, that you're going to be able to birth this baby, that you're going to be able to support this baby once it's here. Yep. Like, trust in the process. Totally. And
it's the hardest thing, hardest thing to do. But it's a practice. It's a practice.
Yeah. We're kind of getting close to the end here. So I kind of wanted to move towards advice. We have a lot of yoga teachers listening and a lot of yoga students listening who perhaps are doing their prenatal training or are interested in doing it. So maybe you could just lean into, I know you've already kind of said how it helps us to be more well-rounded teachers in general if we have our prenatal yoga teacher training. But perhaps you could just give a little advice on how prenatal training best helps to support and serve expectant mothers in your community. You can speak to that, but how they might find prenatal yoga helps them support their community in more ways than one.
Well, prenatal yoga or prenatal yoga training isn't just about pregnancy. If we think about it, really, it's about women's bodies. So you're really then going to be serving potentially, I would say, you got 50% of your population, but in yoga classes, it's probably 70 or 80% of who you teach. And if you think about it, really think about it, how many of those people are mothers? Probably quite a lot. Let's just say. I mean, this is just throwing it out there, but just even having an idea of what those bodies have been through can surely only help you. Because if we think about all of the changes that we were talking about, that's not something that, yes, okay, they're pregnant now, currently, so that's helpful. But we're not like this. You now know what has happened in their bodies. 20 years later, that has still happened in their bodies. So it can only still benefit you in general. Like, I can talk about stance. And when you talk about alignment, I know exactly that the woman's pelvis is different than a man's. I know when you have a baby, your hip shift, is it going to feel really comfortable to do things exactly the same pre having a child to post? No, it isn't. So it can really only support you in your teaching because, like I said, your community is probably mostly women who have either or going to be pregnant, maybe potentially, or they already have been. So I just think that it's only going to serve you better overall because you're only, any knowledge is good knowledge. Let's be honest. Any training is good. It's only going to further your practice, your experience for your students. You can take a training that doesn't resonate with you, but there's always going to be something that you can take from it, right? There's always going to be some knowledge or something new or a different perspective that you love or you don't love. But either way, you're always going to learn more about yourself. You're always going to learn more about yourself as a teacher and as a student. So, like I said, I think it can only benefit you to take a prenatal training. It's just how, we don't know enough about our own bodies, about how it works. I mean, it tells you information about your cycles, about, there's so many things. And there's so much of the anatomy that people don't talk about. It's so important that I just think it kind of feels like you have to. It kind of feels like you have to take the prenatal training. It just, regardless if you teach prenatal yoga or not, there's always going to be a pregnant person. There's always going to be maybe somebody postpartum. You're going to have that information. You're going to know, okay, well, that person's just been through this. It gives you a level of understanding then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It changes the way that you teach potentially, or even just modify for them. So yeah, it would be my advice to do it if you're thinking about it.
Thank you. Very, thought-provoking for myself.
Yeah.
And inspiring for many listeners, I'm sure, because I definitely have a passion and interest in female cycles and women's circles. That's something I've kind of been pondering a little more as something I'd like to offer. But yeah, having a stronger knowledge base, not just personal experience, is a huge part of being able to host things like that. So thank you for that reminder.
And interestingly, it was actually, Joanna, you don't even know this. You posted something maybe a couple of years ago about you're interested in cycles and female health and to live with our cycles and what that really means. And then I became really interested in that from your post. It goes like that.
Cool.
Hey?
I love
it. It is cool. So I can relate to what Joanna's saying, but also I can relate to what you were saying because I work as a massage therapist too. And the number of women I have coming through when they fill out their consultation forms who have had an experience during pregnancy, birth, or postpartum, which not necessarily bad, just different. But this is something we need to be aware of before we go into the session. Yes, it's really relatable, and I think it changes what we can do as well, being practitioners, if we have the knowledge base to hand. Absolutely. Also helps the individuals feel more understood, and that's the connection building that you've been touching upon throughout this so well. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. We have one final question for you. It's our favorite question.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, how do you live your yoga?
Yeah, I'm going to come back to it. I was thinking about this again before, but I'm going to come back to it. It's just to be present. Like, that is my yoga right now. I was talking to Joe about this a few weeks ago. Like, my practice and my yoga has changed so much over the years, like so much. So, started really like physical asana, it's moved through breathwork, pranayama, meditation, all the things. And right now it's just really trying to be present. I try and do, meditations when I can, but presence is it's the thing I have to keep coming back to. It's the only thing I really have right now in my life, besides teaching. So I live my yoga by staying as present as possible right now.
It is key, and it's a constant practice.
All the time. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your insight, your wisdom, your experiences, your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing all that you've shared with us. I know personally, I've taken so much from this conversation. As I navigate being a female on this plane and trying to figure out myself, what that represents and what I want to contribute to being here, and motherhood and all that comes with that, and being a yoga teacher, a female yoga teacher, and how I want to empower other females. And so just thank you for all of your insight. It's been so valuable for me personally, and I'm sure for our listeners too. Yeah, Salla, did you want to add anything?
Just, I thoroughly enjoyed that. Same with Joanna, I'm having such a love affair with my female community right now. And so to have the luxury and time to talk about these subjects with you was everything that is interesting and inspiring. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Joanna Salla, Your Yoga Flow. I felt very honored to be asked to be on it. I had a bit of imposter syndrome, like, what do I have to say? So I really appreciate those kind words. And yeah, I really hope that, it was relatable, and there's, mothers and, other people out there that can really connect to my experience as well. Like you said, connection, it's so important. And, I just hope that your listeners will enjoy it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, Christine and Salla, and all our listeners. Thank you.